Suzanne Capper was only 16 when she died. But while the circumstances surrounding her death were horrific, her murder was largely overshadowed in the press by the murder of 2-year-old James Bulger 2 months later. Still, Suzanne Capper's story of a quiet, friendless girl who clung desperately to the few connections she had managed to make, no matter how violently and terribly they treated her, is one of the most sadistic accounts of murder in British history. This is the disturbing story of Suzanne Capper's death. Born in the Greater Manchester region of England in 1976, Suzanne Jane Capper was described by her mother as very forgiving. Growing up, she and her sister Michelle never knew their biological father. They were raised primarily by their mother Elizabeth Dunbar and their stepfather, John Capper. However, the couple split when Capper was only 14 years old, a split that proved to be traumatic for the whole family. Capper and Michelle alternated between staying with their mother, their stepfather, family friends, or in the care of local authorities. This instability and frequent relocating ultimately led Suzanne Capper to the home of Jean Powell. Capper and Jean met shortly after a chance encounter with a boy around her age, named Clifford Pook, John Powell's younger brother. Pook had been sitting by the side of the road one day, lamenting a situation with his girlfriend, when Capper approached him to see if he was okay. Jean and Capper met shortly after. Jean was 10 years Capper's senior, a 26-year-old living with 3 children in a dilapidated home not far from John Capper's house. Often babysitting Jean's young children for free, Capper would spend the night at their home and skipping school the next morning. In only a short time, Capper was spending more time with Jean and her friends than anyone else, her family largely unaware of the true horrors going on behind the scenes. We found out that Jean had taken Suzanne out of school and was making her work as a cleaner at the CIS building in town, Capper's mother later said. She was taking Capper's money, just letting her keep £5 a week, while we thought she was in school. When we confronted her about it, she actually threatened to burn our house down. The real trouble began, however, when a neighbor named Bernadette McNeely moved in. 24-year-old Bernadette McNeely had 3 children of her own and had been living only a few doors down from Jean Powell. But by 1992, she had all but moved into Powell's house, along with her children. The ramshackle house had become a den of drugs, parties, and sex. Jean and Bernadette were weighing amphetamines in the kitchen, dealing them in the living room, selling stolen car parts, and sleeping with a slew of people who came through the house for drugs. Above all, a 16-year-old named Anthony Dudson, who entered a sexual relationship with both Powell and McNeely, as well as Suzanne Capper. The house was also frequented by Jean's 29-year-old ex-husband Glyn Powell, 26-year-old drug addict Jeffrey Lee, and Clifford Pook. Sometime around late November 1992, at one of their drug-fueled parties, Capper and Jean met a friend of a friend named Mohammed Yusuf. Capper encouraged Jean to sleep with him, a suggestion Jean didn't care for. She later told police that she severely punished Capper for trying to make her go with Yusuf. Capper, however, told neighbors that Jean Powell had tied her up and held her for 4 days. None of them believed her. It was the first of several petty spats that eventually led to Suzanne Capper's horrible death. In another instance, McNeely, Dudson, and Jean and Glyn Powell all contracted pubic lice. Bernadette McNeely blamed Capper. Enraged by this baseless claim, the group forced the girl to shave her pubic hair in front of them and clean it off the floor. McNeely had also convinced herself that Capper had stolen a pink duffel coat from her, worth around $60. Then, on December 7, 1992, Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely arrived at John Capper's house to invite Suzanne Capper to a party. A boy she liked was going to be there, they told her. There was no boy, however. There was no party. Having lured Suzanne Capper to Powell's house, the group, high on amphetamines and at this time, comprised of Bernadette McNeely, Jean Powell, Glyn Powell, and Anthony Dudson shaved her head, attacked her, beat her with wooden utensils and belts, and suffocated her with a plastic bag. That night, they locked her in a cupboard. Capper screamed all through the night. The 6 children who were still living in the home heard her cries. The next day, Suzanne Capper's friends moved her into McNeely's former home, where no children were present to hear the teenager scream. They tied her to a bed frame with cord, rope, electric flex, belts, and a chain, injected themselves with amphetamines, and began their depraved, days-long torture. During this time, McNeely injected so many amphetamines that she began to call herself Chucky after the character from Child's Play. During visits to the house, Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee also partook in the girl's torture. Her mouth was stuffed with socks so she couldn't scream. She was given a bath in concentrated disinfectants, burning her skin. Her body was covered in cigarette burns. At one point, just hours before her death, Bernadette McNeely injected Capper with amphetamines, placed headphones over her ears, and blasted rave music at full volume featuring Chucky's catchphrase, looping on repeat, "I'm Chucky. Wanna play?" Suzanne Capper's torturers pried out 2 of her front teeth so that her body would be more difficult to identify. They had decided to kill her. Loading her into the trunk of a car that Leigh stole, they drove Capper 13 miles to a wooded area near Stockport. 3 of them, Leigh, Dudson, and McNeely, shoved her through the bramble, and as she lay almost entirely naked on the ground, Bernadette McNeely doused her in gasoline. "I saw a flash," Jean Powell said during her trial. "I turned around and looked and saw Suzanne in flames. She was screaming. I was numb. I was scared." They left her for dead in the early hours of the morning, singing "Burn, Baby, Burn" all the way home. But Suzanne Capper wasn't dead yet. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself to the nearest roadway, where she was spotted by the driver of a passing vehicle. At the hospital, before she fell into a coma and ultimately died, she was able to tell the police who she was, what had happened, and who exactly had been responsible. In the end, Jean Powell, Glyn Powell, and Bernadette McNeely were given life sentences for Suzanne Capper's murder. Though McNeely's sentence was controversially reduced by 12 months after she proved to be a model prisoner, filled with remorse. Leigh was released from prison in 1998, Pook in 2001, and Anthony Dudson in 2013. Suzanne was very forgiving, Capper's mother said, but she was also a girl who would try to sort out her problems on her own. That's what she did in the end. She survived her ordeal long enough to name every single one of them. On October 22, 2013, a 9th grader at a high school did the unthinkable. At just 14, he brutalized his 24-year-old math teacher. In the early morning hours of October 23, 2013, math teacher Colleen Ritzer was found dead behind Danvers High School in Massachusetts. She'd been sexually assaulted, her throat was slit, and a note beside her body read, "I hate you all." Colleen Ritzer was a well-liked teacher, and the police initially had no idea who could have a motive to kill her. Then, they learned that one of her 9th grade students, 14-year-old Philip Chisholm, had been found walking along the side of a highway with a bloody box cutter, and the pieces began falling into place. While staying after school for extra help on October 22nd, Chisholm had followed Ritzer into a bathroom, raped her, and strangled her before dragging her body into the woods behind the building in a recycling bin. There, he'd assaulted her once again and slit her throat. Philip Chisholm was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison, but no amount of punishment would bring back Colleen Ritzer, the beloved teacher who was brutally murdered at just 24. Colleen Ritzer had always dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her mother, Peggy Ritzer, once recalled she wanted to be a teacher from the time she was in preschool. As she got older, She excelled in math, so she wanted to teach math. Ritzer graduated magna cum laude from Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, in 2011 with a degree in mathematics and a concentration in secondary education. She accepted a job at a middle school, teaching 8th grade math. Her colleague Charlotte de Zerkax stated in 2013 that Ritzer knew just a few weeks into her first year in the classroom that she'd found her calling. She cared about every single student and put in many hours after school every day, always thinking about how she could be better and better help students, said Zerkax. She was truly a beautiful person. Ritzer was excited to begin teaching geometry and algebra at Danvers High School in 2012. She frequently used social media to interact with her teenage students. "Full school week ahead," she once wrote. "That can only mean one thing: lots of math fun." She even described herself in her Twitter profile as a math teacher often too excited about the topics I'm teaching. So it was a shock to everyone when Colleen Ritzer was brutally murdered just 2 months into her second year at the school. On Tuesday, October 22, 2013, Colleen Ritzer asked Philip Chisholm to stay after school for some extra help. Another student later recalled that Ritzer had asked Chisholm about his recent move from Tennessee, which made Chisholm visibly upset. Ritzer quickly changed the subject, but her innocent question may have set off the grisly chain of events that followed. According to a timeline reported by the New York Times, at 2:54 p.m., Ritzer left the classroom to walk to the bathroom down the hall. Security footage from the school showed Chisholm following her a minute later. He pulled his hood over his head and entered the women's restroom behind her. At 3:06 p.m., a female student went into the bathroom and immediately turned back around. She later testified that she saw a bare bottom and thought she'd walked in on someone changing clothes. 1 minute later, Chisholm left the bathroom carrying the pants that Colleen Ritzer had been wearing. He returned at 3:16 p.m. with a recycling bin, which he dragged back out of the school at 3:22, this time wearing a black ski mask as well. When Chisholm failed to return home that evening, his mother reported him missing. An officer located him walking on a highway shortly after midnight and found a bloody box cutter in his possession. When he asked where the blood was from, Chisholm simply responded, "The girl." Chisholm also had Ritzer's credit card and underwear in his possession. At the same time, police were searching for Ritzer, who had also been reported missing. A few hours later, they found her body beneath some leaves near Danvers High School. She was naked from the waist down, and her corpse had been sexually staged. Chisholm's backpack and school ID were also discovered nearby. The authorities quickly put 2 and 2 together and arrested Philip Chisholm for Colleen Ritzer's murder. Prosecutors decided to try Chisholm as an adult due to the brutality of the crime. An investigation into Colleen Ritzer's death revealed that he'd raped her in the school bathroom, and a female student had unknowingly walked in on the act, before stuffing her into the recycling bin and dragging her into the woods. Ritzer was likely still alive when Chisholm sexually assaulted her again with a tree branch in the woods, which he left inside her when he abandoned her body, and then slit her throat. At Chisholm's trial, Essex County Assistant District Attorney Kate McDougall said that Ritzer's body had been stripped, battered, brutalized, and violated. He had a goal, McDougall told jurors, a terrible, terrible purpose. And he played it out in the woods, and he didn't care what came after that. Authorities determined that immediately after killing Colleen Ritzer, Chisholm had gone to the movie theater to watch a Woody Allen film and shoplifted a knife from a BJ's wholesale club. Chisholm's attorney, Denise Regan, argued that this chilling behavior was due to Chisholm's severe mental illness. He was purportedly suffering a psychotic episode and hearing voices at the time of the murder. When Philip Chisholm followed Miss Ritzer into that bathroom, he was not himself. He was not a kind, smart 14-year-old boy. He was responding to terrible command hallucinations in his head. He didn't choose to do this. Jurors didn't buy this defense, however. Philip Chisholm was convicted of murder, rape, and armed robbery, and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Hoping to celebrate their daughter's life despite her tragic death, Colleen Ritzer's family created a scholarship in her memory. 1 year after Ritzer's murder, they released a statement marking the occasion. Colleen was good, kind, and loving, they wrote. She was passionate about teaching and loved the life that she worked so hard to achieve. On December 6, 2009, a young Utah mother named Suzanne Powell disappeared. Police immediately suspected her husband Josh Powell was to blame. His story about taking their sons on a seemingly random camping trip was suspicious at best, and as investigators uncovered more information, a much darker tale began to play out before them. Josh Powell had not quite been the loving husband he seemed to be from the outside. Unable to control his spending, Powell had racked up more than $200,000 in debt. He had also grown increasingly possessive of his wife, threatening to leave the country should she ever divorce him. The story came to a horrifying end when, during a supervised visit with a social worker, Powell incapacitated his 2 sons with an axe, doused them in gasoline, and set the house on fire, killing himself and the 2 young boys in the explosion. This is not a love story. It is a story of obsession, betrayal, and tragedy. This is the story of Josh Powell. Josh Powell was born on January 20th, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church. The family was hardly adherent to their religious values. Stephen Powell was a violent and abusive man, and according to divorce documents, his influence wreaked havoc on his family. Stephen and Terica's divorce papers include allegations of mental unfitness, pornography, polygamy, and even witchcraft, the newspaper reported in 2012. Stephen had accused Terica of practicing New Age mysticism alongside her Mormon beliefs, which he attributed to devil worship. But Terica would later say that it had instead been Stephen who collected occult books and even shared pornography with his sons. It is especially disturbing, then, that Stephen Powell was arrested on charges of child pornography and voyeurism in 2011. Stephen Powell's behavior had an obvious impact on his children, especially Josh, who, as a teenager, allegedly killed his sister's gerbils, threatened his mother with a butcher's knife, and attempted suicide at least once. But by the time he was in college, Josh Powell had seemingly broken free of his father's influence. He attended the University of Washington, where he met a woman named Catherine Everett at a local LDS church activity. The two even began living together, until Powell started to exhibit signs of possessive behavior. In 2018, Everett stated, "He would have restrictions and limitations on what I could and couldn't do when it came to my family. If I was going to visit them, he had to come too. I couldn't go by myself." Everett eventually broke up with Powell over the phone while visiting a friend in Utah. She never returned to Seattle. Then, Josh Powell met Susan Marie Cox and proposed within days. Susan Cox was another member of the LDS Church, born in New Mexico but raised in Puyallup. When she met Josh Powell in November 2000, she was just 18 years old and studying cosmetology. She was hosting a dinner for the church's Institute of Religion course, and Powell became infatuated with her. Days later, he proposed, and the couple got married at the LDS Portland, Oregon Temple on April 6, 2001. For a short time after they wed, the couple moved back in with Josh's father in South Hill, Washington, which quickly put some cracks in their relationship. Stephen Powell developed a disturbing fascination with Susan, following her around the house with a camcorder, spying on her with a mirror when she used the restroom, stealing her underwear, and reading her journals. In 2003, Stephen ultimately confessed his feelings to Susan, who naturally rejected him. Shortly after, she and Josh moved out of state to put some distance between Stephen and themselves, though it was clear from Susan's journals that the two were already experiencing some marital strife. While she had found work as a broker with Wells Fargo Investments, Josh had trouble holding down jobs, and he began putting more distance between himself and the LDS Church. On top of this, his extravagant spending habits plunged him further into debt. Friends also noted that he was possessive of his wife, and he continued to speak to his father despite Stephen's obsession with Susan. In 2007, Josh Powell filed for bankruptcy and declared more than $200,000 in debts. A year later, Susan recorded a video of property damage that Josh had allegedly caused and secretly wrote a will in which she stated, "I want it documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage." She also wrote, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." Then, in 2009, the unthinkable happened. Susan Powell vanished. The last time anyone outside the Powell household saw Susan alive was on December 6, 2009, when a neighbor paid her a quick visit around 5 p.m. The next morning, Josh Powell failed to show up for his shift at work, and neither of the couple's two sons, Charlie and Braden, arrived at daycare. Daycare workers alerted Josh's mother, and the entire Powell family was declared missing on December 7th. Police searched the Powell household, but they found no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Curiously, however, 2 fans were aimed to blow at a wet spot on the carpet. Then, shockingly, Josh, Braden, and Charlie returned home around 5 p.m. without Susan. Josh told investigators that he had taken his sons camping, forgetting that it was a school night. Why he had opted to randomly take his children on an overnight camping trip was never made clear. Never mind the fact that there had been blizzard conditions that evening. Josh had also failed to inform his boss that he wouldn't be in. More alarmingly, though, detectives found Susan's phone in the family's minivan, which Josh could not explain. Josh, meanwhile, insisted that Susan had probably run off with another man. Investigators had plenty of suspicion, but they lacked a crucial piece of evidence: Susan Powell's body. The Associated Press later reported that Charlie had told investigators in an interview that Susan had gone on the camping trip with the rest of the family, but did not return with him. A few weeks later, he told a church leader, "My mom is dead." The police were ultimately unable to prove that Josh Powell or anyone else had murdered Susan, unfortunately, because their lead suspect not only ended his own life, but took the lives of his children as well. Josh Powell was clearly a person of interest in the investigation into Susan's disappearance. But he retained custody of his children. He decided to move his family back to Puyallup, where they lived with his father. While continuing to investigate Josh, police also took a closer look at his family. And it wasn't long before they learned of Stephen Powell's prior obsession with Susan. They discovered that he had taken more than 4,500 photos and videos of her. They likewise found that Stephen Powell had been videotaping numerous women and young girls, and he was ultimately arrested for child pornography and voyeurism. Following Stephen Powell's arrest, Susan's parents were granted custody of Charlie and Braden, with a Washington court ruling that if Josh wanted to get his sons back, he would have to move out of his father's house. Then, on February 5, 2012, a social worker named Elizabeth Griffin Hall took 7-year-old Charlie and 5-year-old Braden to see their father for a supervised visit. However, as soon as the boys arrived, Josh pulled his sons inside and locked Griffin Hall out. Not long after, the house exploded. Josh, Charlie, and Braden Powell died as a result. Investigators later discovered an axe lying near Josh Powell's body. They believe that he used it to attack his children before the explosion, as evidenced by injuries on their heads and necks. Susan Cox Powell remains missing to this day, but considering what happened to her children, many people are certain that Josh Powell killed her as well. On October 21, 2009, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante lured her neighbor, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten, into the woods near their homes in St. Martin's, Missouri. Alyssa claimed that she had a surprise waiting for Elizabeth in the forest. Instead, Alyssa strangled the young girl, slit her throat, and stabbed her in the chest 8 times, killing her. Alyssa Bustamante seemed like an ordinary teenage girl. Friends said, "She was just always so sweet and everybody loved her. She was just amazing." But inside her mind, and as her internet persona revealed, there was a much darker person lurking beneath the surface of this 15-year-old girl. It may have surprised her friends and family, but Alyssa Bustamante's virtual alter ego would foreshadow her most heinous act. Between 2002 and 2009, Alyssa Bustamante was raised by her grandparents. Her mother, Michelle Bustamante, had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, which led to criminal charges and jail time. Her father, Cesar Bustamante, was serving jail time for assault. Alyssa's grandparents consequently took legal custody of her and her 3 younger siblings in California. To escape their former lives, the kids moved to a rural, ranch-like property in St. Martin's, Missouri, just west of the state capital of Jefferson City. Despite the setbacks of her parents, Alyssa became an A and B student in high school. Alyssa Bustamante was a normal kid by all appearances, and her grandparents provided a stable home where Alyssa's parents could not. Friends said she would write poems and joke around. She regularly attended church at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where she participated in several youth activities. But in 2007, Alyssa tried to kill herself. After spending 10 days at a psychiatric hospital, the teen went on antidepressants. Despite her medication, Alyssa practiced cutting herself several times. Friends said she frequently showed them the scars on her wrists. Online Alyssa was an entirely different person. Alyssa Bustamante's Twitter feed talked about how she hated authority. One post read, "Bad decisions make great stories." She listed her hobbies on YouTube and MySpace as killing people and cutting. She also posted a YouTube video where she tried to get 2 of her brothers to try to touch an electrified fence. Then, on October 21, 2009, Alyssa Bustamante brought her darkest fantasies to light. 4 houses down from the Bustamante family lived 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. She often came over to play with Alyssa and her siblings. On the night Olten was killed, her mother, Patricia Prius, says she begged to go to Alyssa's house to play. This was at 5 p.m., the last time Prius saw her daughter alive. By 6 p.m., when Elizabeth didn't come home, her mom knew something was wrong. The day after Elizabeth's disappearance, FBI agents questioned Alyssa and seized her diary. Authorities found a shallow hole behind Alyssa's house that seemed to be in the shape of a grave. The teenager told the FBI she just liked to dig holes. Later in the investigation, authorities found another shallow grave covered with leaves behind the Bustamante house. Elizabeth's body was inside. Prosecutors charged Alyssa with first-degree murder and arrested her. Everyone was shocked. Before all of this, she was a normal 15-year-old girl, a friend stated. "This really isn't her. This was not the Alyssa that I knew." But according to reports, an entry from Alyssa Bustamante's diary revealed a vastly more horrific person. Though Alyssa had tried to cover up the entry by blotting out the blue ink in her diary, investigators were able to unveil the original writing underneath, in which she chronicled the euphoria she felt after killing Elizabeth Olten. She wrote, "I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the 'oh my god, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. 'Kay, I gotta go to church now, lol." In court, Alyssa Bustamante confessed to killing Elizabeth Olten. She said she strangled Elizabeth before cutting the girl's throat and stabbing her in the chest. Afterward, Alyssa buried her victim's body in the hand-dug, shallow grave behind their homes. Alyssa's defense attorneys pointed to her troubled childhood as a means to apply leniency in any sentence. But a judge ruled that Alyssa Bustamante would be tried as an adult. Then, a few weeks before her 2012 trial for first-degree murder was scheduled to begin, a little more than 2 years after the murder, Alyssa accepted a plea deal to the lesser charge of second-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. As part of the plea deal, she may get out of jail in 30 years on parole. After getting a new attorney in 2014, Alyssa Bustamante contended that she would not have pleaded guilty in 2012 had she known of a pending U.S. Supreme Court case that affected how the justice system should handle cases of juveniles and first-degree murder cases. The judge in the case denied the lawyer's plea for a new sentence. Patricia Prius, Elizabeth Olten's grieving mother, felt as if the original sentence was still too light. In court, she called Alyssa Bustamante a monster and said that she hated everything about her. Prius added, Alyssa was an evil monster during the sentencing, and her speech was so poignant and impassioned that the judge had to ask her to stop. Prius sued the convicted murderer for damages in a wrongful death suit in October 2015, which Prius settled for $5 million 2 years later. An original wrongful death lawsuit also included the hospital where Alyssa had stayed. Prius included Pathways Behavioral Healthcare and 2 of its employees as defendants because she felt Alyssa murdered her daughter while under their care. She believed that the health system should have seen Alyssa's violent tendencies coming and taken preventative measures. A judge threw out the lawsuit against Pathways, but Alyssa Bustamante will ultimately owe Patricia Prius the $5 million, plus interest at 9% per year, until the debt is paid. But no matter the outcome of the trials, the fact remains that a little girl lost her life due to the uncontrollable and violent whims of a troubled teenager. On November 14, 1997, 14-year-old Reena Virk was beaten and killed by a group of her teenage peers. That night, 7 girls and 1 boy between the ages of 14 and 16 cornered Virk beneath a bridge in Victoria, British Columbia, and accused her of trying to steal one of the girls' boyfriends. Then, the group attacked her, viciously punching and kicking her, and trying to light her hair on fire. Bloodied and bruised, Reena Virk nearly escaped with her life, staggering away across the bridge. But 2 of her assailants, Warren Glowatsky and Kelly Ellard, followed her and continued the beating, knocking her unconscious. They dragged her body to the edge of the gorge waterway and drowned her. 8 days later, Reena Virk's body was found in the inlet. Her injuries were so severe that the pathologist who examined her determined she would have likely died even if she had not been drowned. Nearly 3 decades later, Reena Virk's story is being given new attention, thanks in part to the Hulu series Under the Bridge, raising questions about race, bullying, and the desire to feel accepted. Reena Virk was born on March 10, 1983 to Suman and Manjeet Virk. Manjeet had immigrated to Canada from India, while Suman came from an Indo-Canadian family. But unlike other South Asian families in the community, they were not practicing Sikhs. Instead, Suman's family had converted to the Jehovah's Witnesses after moving to Canada, and Manjeet later made the same transition. Various reports described the family as a minority within a minority, and Reena grew up feeling like an outsider. She also despised her parents' strict rules and made several attempts to run away from home. In part, she was motivated by a desperation to fit in among her predominantly white peers, who were reportedly influenced by Los Angeles gang culture. But Reena Virk's desperate struggle to fit in was only made worse by the bullying she suffered. Her peers allegedly mocked her relentlessly for her weight and for being different. This caused her to take extreme measures to escape what she felt was an oppressive home. In 1996, she falsely accused her father of sexually molesting her. This accusation led to Reena being placed for a few months in a foster home, while her father was scrutinized by investigators. Reena reportedly dropped the charges, and her claims were found to be groundless. But as reported in 2006, her parents believe that if social workers had been more thorough in their investigation, and Reena had not been placed in foster care, she might never have met her killers in the first place. Unfortunately, there was no way to change what happened. On November 14, 1997, Reena Virk was invited to a party in a field behind the Shoreline School in View Royal. Police arrived to break up the party, however, and the group quickly moved to a spot near the Craig Flower Bridge to drink and smoke. But the party quickly turned into a nightmare for Virk. As a small crowd watched, one girl, Nicole Cook, approached Virk and put out a lit cigarette on her forehead. She went on to berate Virk, accusing her of spreading rumors about her and trying to steal her boyfriend. Then, the other teens swarmed. 8 teens gathered around Virk, viciously punching and kicking her and burning her skin with cigarettes. As she lay on the ground bearing the brunt of this assault, she reportedly cried out, "I'm sorry." Most people who were there left once the attack broke out, but some stayed and continued to watch. Eventually, one teen called out for the others to stop, and it seemed as if this violent attack had come to an end. But as Reena Virk staggered, bloody and beaten, across the bridge, she was approached again by 2 of her assailants, 15-year-old Kelly Ellard and 16-year-old Warren Glotsky. Ellard and Glotsky once again started attacking Virk, punching her and bashing her head off a tree. Virk lost consciousness, and Ellard and Glotsky dragged her body to the edge of the gorge. There, Ellard allegedly held Virk's head underwater, drowning her. Although Ellard later denied this, she did admit to rolling Virk's unconscious body into the water. Reena Virk's parents reported her missing after she didn't return home from the party that night. But it wouldn't be for another 8 days that her partially clothed body was finally found floating in the gorge. An autopsy report detailed extensive damage to Virk's body, multiple severe blows to the abdomen, bruising all over her face, a sneaker-shaped bruise on the back of her head, and swelling in her brain. The coroner ultimately concluded that Reena would have likely died from her injuries had she not been drowned. Now, the question for investigators was, who had killed Reena Virk, and why? It didn't take long for some of the teens who attended the party under the bridge to report the swarming attack they'd witnessed. By the end of the month, all 8 of Reena Virk's attackers were arrested. In total, 7 of them were prosecuted in relation to Virk's murder. They were Nicole Cook, Nicole Peterson, Missy Grace Pleash, Courtney Keith, Gail Ooms, Kelly Ellard, and Warren Glotsky. 6 of the girls were convicted of assault, causing bodily harm, and sentenced to up to 1 year in custody. But only Ellard and Glotsky were charged with Virk's murder. Warren Glotsky had a troubled home life. His mother was an alcoholic, and his father had left and moved alone to California, leaving Warren behind. At the time of Virk's murder, he was living with a friend. It's not clear why, exactly, he had involved himself in the initial assault on Virk, or why he joined Ellard in the second attack. He was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder in 1999 and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 7 years. His first request in 2004 was denied. Kelly Ellard, meanwhile, came from a relatively stable, traditional family, though her parents were reportedly divorced. Again, it's not entirely clear why she initially attacked Virk. Though some, such as the academic activist Yasmin Jawani, have argued racism may have played a part. At her first trial in 2000, Ellard was found guilty of second-degree murder. However, The Supreme Court of Canada later overturned that decision on technical legal grounds. A second trial in 2004 resulted in a deadlocked jury and a mistrial. At this trial, Ellard insisted she was innocent, telling jurors, "I am not a monster." In 2005, however, a third trial saw Ellard convicted. She was sentenced to life in prison. In the wake of their daughter's gruesome murder, Suzanne and Manjeet Virk became prominent anti-bullying advocates, successfully pushing the government of British Columbia to create a number of anti-bullying programs in schools. In 2009, they were even honored with British Columbia's Anthony Hulme Award of Distinction for their efforts. While incarcerated, Warren Glowatsky showed deep remorse for killing Virk. He also discovered that he was of Métis heritage, a person of mixed European and Indigenous ancestry, which helped guide his rehabilitation. Eventually, his work toward healing led him to meet with Suzanne and Manjeet Virk to apologize in person. Surprisingly, the Virks forgave him, stating, "The most important reason why they've forgiven Warren is so they can just put this whole matter aside and for their own healing and sense of wholeness." In 2010, Warren Glowatsky was fully paroled, a decision which the Virks supported. Kelly Ellard, meanwhile, continued to proclaim her innocence in prison. During this time, she also smuggled in illegal drugs and broke numerous penitentiary rules. She was given conditional day parole in 2017, which was then extended multiple times in the subsequent years. It was also revealed that she had changed her name to Carrie Marie Sim, and that she had given birth to a child conceived during a conjugal visit with her boyfriend. They had a second child in 2020. Then, Sim's day parole was suspended in August 2021 because she failed to report an incident of domestic violence, though this suspension was cancelled in October of that same year. The parole board also deemed her to be of a moderate to high moderate risk of re-offending. In 2022, Sim waived her right to another parole hearing, saying that she did not believe she was ready to return to society. Now, the murder of Reena Virk has been dramatized in the Hulu miniseries Under the Bridge, starring Lily Gladstone and Riley Keough. The series will explore the culture of bullying that contributed to Virk's tragic death. For years, Kathleen Savio told anyone who would listen that her ex-husband, Drew Peterson, might hurt her. Tragically, when she turned up dead in a bathtub in 2004, her death was ruled an accident. But then Peterson's new wife, Stacy, disappeared, and that changed everything. Suddenly, renewed attention was given to Savio's marriage and to the statements she'd made to friends, family, and even the police. This consequently brought renewed scrutiny upon Drew Peterson, a former police officer in Bolingbrook, Illinois, who had 3 additional failed marriages. Eventually, investigators ruled that Savio's death hadn't been accidental after all. In 2012, Drew Peterson was finally convicted of Savio's murder. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to his grisly crimes. So who was Drew Peterson, the ex-cop who was a danger to every woman who married him? Born on January 5, 1954, Drew Walter Peterson lived the first part of his life on the straight and narrow. He joined the military after graduating high school in 1972, married his high school girlfriend Carol Hamilton, and in 1977, joined the police force in Bolingbrook, Illinois. But although Drew and Hamilton were married for 6 years, all was not well in their relationship. Hamilton later stated that Drew had never been abusive or controlling toward her, but he had cheated on her while she was pregnant with one of their 2 sons. "I thought he always had respect for me, but I guess when you stray in a relationship, you don't have respect for the person that you were doing that to," she said. Drew and Hamilton divorced in 1980, and Drew quickly rebounded with 20-year-old Kyle Peary, to whom he was briefly engaged. Peary later stated that her ex-fiancé was not abusive toward her either, but that he could be controlling. He always wanted to know where she was going and who she was seeing, and he sometimes followed her. I decided there were too many things that just made me really uncomfortable, Perry said of ending their engagement. There were little things that just made you think, something's wrong here. Next, in 1982, Drew Peterson married Vicki Connolly. Unlike Hamilton and Perry, however, Connolly claims that Peterson was violent toward her during the course of their 9.5-year marriage. Connolly said, "He put me up against the wall in the garage and grabbed me by the throat. Another time, he told me he would kill me and make it look like an accident." As their marriage soured, Peterson went on a blind date with an accountant named Kathleen Savio. 6 months later, Peterson divorced Connolly and proposed to Savio, who accepted. They married in 1992, had 2 sons, and co-owned a tavern. But their marriage had its problems. Savio's sisters suspected that Peterson physically abused her, and in 2001, Savio found a note in their mailbox alleging that her husband had started an affair with a 17-year-old. They subsequently separated, and 2 years later, Peterson married the woman he'd been cheating with, Stacy Peterson. All the while, as their divorce proceedings turned ugly, Kathleen Savio began to fear for her life. As their marriage had ended, Drew Peterson and Kathleen Savio's divorce turned bitter. Savio reportedly wanted to fight for what she believed she was owed for 11 years of marriage. But as Peterson and Savio clashed over custody agreements and splitting the revenue from their bar, Savio began to worry that her ex would hurt her. "He's gonna kill me, and it's gonna look like an accident," Savio allegedly told her sister, Sue Dolman. On March 11, 2002, Savio filed for an emergency order of protection against her husband. According to reports, Peterson had threatened her on the phone and run after her. "Drew wants me dead," she wrote in the report, which was later dropped. "And if he has to, he will burn the house down just to shut me up." About 4 months later, on July 5th, Savio alleged that Peterson had come to her home and threatened her. He asked her if she was afraid, and she told him she was. The police report about the incident stated, "She finally told him to go or do what he came for, kill her." He said, "Okay, where do you want it?" She told him in the head. He took out his knife, but then said he could not hurt her. The report also noted, however, that Peterson claimed that they'd merely talked, and that Savio had tried to seduce him. In the end, nothing came out of it. That November, Savio also wrote to the assistant state's attorney. She described a number of altercations with Peterson and wrote, "He knows how to manipulate the system, and his next step is to take my children away, or kill me instead. I haven't received help from the police here in Bolingbrook, and I am asking for your help now. Before it's too late, please return my call or write with answers to my questions." Then, on March 1st, 2004, Kathleen Savio was found dead in her bathtub, with a 1-inch cut on the back of her head. Though the tub was dry, her hair was wet. A subsequent coroner's jury determined that Savio had died from accidental drowning. In any case, the ex-husband that she had so feared had an alibi. His new wife, Stacy, claimed that he had been with her. And the story of Kathleen Savio's death might have ended there, except that Stacy Peterson went missing in 2007. On October 28, 2007, Stacy Ann Peterson disappeared. Drew Peterson claimed that he'd woken up at 11 a.m. that day, and she was simply gone. He later said that he'd spoken to her at 9 p.m. that night, and that she'd told him she was leaving him. "I believe she's with someone else," Peterson stated, "but I believe she's safe." Her disappearance, however, rang alarm bells for investigators working his ex-wife's case. There are some unusual circumstances in the 2004 case. Illinois State's Attorney James Glasgow told reporters on October 31, 2007, noting that his office was taking another look at Savio's death. 2 weeks later, investigators labeled Stacy Peterson's disappearance as a potential homicide. They also exhumed Kathleen Savio's body to re-examine her remains. And, this time, her death didn't look so accidental. I'm convinced she was the victim of a murder. Former New York City Chief Medical Examiner Michael Baden told the Associated Press, after examining Savio's body, he determined that Savio had been killed after a struggle and then placed in the bathtub. Whodunit is up to the police to resolve. To the chagrin of the victims' families, Drew Peterson seemed to relish the media attention. Seemingly unconcerned about his wife's whereabouts, he quipped on the Today Show in February 2008, "I'm not trying to be funny here, but Stacey Peterson would ask me for a divorce on a regular basis, and it was based on her menstrual cycle." He also struck up a new relationship, this time with Christina Rains. According to Rains, who left him in 2009, Drew talked about how he could easily snap someone's neck. But in 2009, Drew Peterson stopped laughing. On May 7th, he was arrested and indicted for Kathleen Savio's murder. 3 years later, he was found guilty. At his sentencing in February 2013, Peterson shouted, "I did not kill Kathleen." Her sister, Susan Dahman, shouted back, "Yes, you did." "You liar." Drew Peterson was then sentenced to 38 years in prison. Even behind bars, Drew Peterson has had an eventful couple of years. He fought against his conviction and tried to have the prosecuting attorney in his case, James Glasgow, killed. "So how long before you think your uncle can take care of business?" Peterson asked a fellow inmate who recorded their conversation. When the informant replied that the hit would be done by Christmas, Peterson responded, "It'd be a nice Christmas present." As a result, he was sentenced to an additional 40 years behind bars. Peterson has continued to maintain his innocence in the death of Kathleen Savio and the disappearance of Stacey Peterson. In November 2021, he sat down for an interview with Dateline and insisted that he hadn't hurt either woman. "The prosecution is making up facts," he told Natalie Morales. "The prosecution staged a prosecution with Kathy. They took an accident and staged a prosecution. Everybody's twisting it to make me look bad, okay? They're twisting it to make their prosecution, or what they're trying to say against me, work." When Morales asked Drew what kind of husband he'd been, he responded, "I was a loving husband, okay? What can I say? I was a good husband, a good provider." That doesn't change the fact that one of Drew Peterson's wives is dead and another is missing. Though Stacey Peterson hasn't been seen since 2008, her family maintains hope that her remains will be found. "This is not a 9-to-5 job to me," her sister Cassandra Cale stated after urging police to search a local canal. "This is, like, 24 hours a day. I don't not think about my sister." As of 2022, though, Stacey Peterson remains missing. And Drew Peterson, if he knows anything about her disappearance, isn't talking. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by subscribing and liking the video. And turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.